All right, on page 206, the background is World War II. I finally went and wrote about it. Don't worry. And the global plague, of course, that took millions around the globe. We know something about that. A global pandemic brought even more tragedy. The influenza claimed nearly 200,000 American lives, many of the deceased in their 20s and 30s in October 1918 alone, the deadliest month in the nation's history. The virus hit soldiers particularly hard, and over half of the LDS fighters who died in December that year did so due to disease. The global death toll reached the tens of millions by the time the pandemic had run its course. Joseph F. Smith, was not spared from tragedy. His eldest son, Hiram Mack, died of a ruptured appendix on January 23, 1918, after he returned from England, where he had been mission president. This was only the latest episode in a lifetime of grief for the Smith family. Though he had nearly 50 children from 6 wives, Hiram was the 13th he had to bury. Polygamy multiplied trauma as much as it did wives. But the death of his firstborn son, named after his own father, who was slain at Carthage, somehow stung even more. Smith, always emotional, confessed an, quote, overwhelming burden of grief and tears that confined him to his apartment for months. In some ways, he never recovered. Hiram's widow, Ida Bowman Smith, gave birth 9 months later to the couple's final child, whom they also called Hiram, named after his father, named after his grandfather. Tragically, Ida then died too from heart failure. Death begat life, which begat death again. Smith spent the remainder of 1918 by himself in his bedroom, contemplating life, contemplating death, and pleading for understanding. His 80 years had been filled with deep emotions and religious enthusiasm, a familial and spiritual sense of purpose. Now, as his days dimmed, he dipped once more into the prophetic legacy that flowed through his veins. On October 3rd, while reading the New Testament and pondering the fate of millions across the globe, dying from war, dying from the flu, dying from evil, he claimed that the Spirit of the Lord rested upon me, and I saw the host of the dead, both small and great. His vision included witnessing an innumerable company of spirits, both just and the unjust, awaiting divine instruction. Christ, aided by his chosen messengers, including biblical prophets and Latter-day Saint leaders alike, granted the deceased both the knowledge and ordinances required for eternal rest. Nearly a century after his uncle, Joseph Smith, claimed a vision that answered the question of which church people should join. The latest Smith prophet dictated a vision that answered the question of what happened when people died. Mormonism's first century was bookended by visions that answered America's most pressing conundrums. Smith never had a chance to present his vision to the saints. Though he felt well enough to surprise those gathered at the Salt Lake Tabernacle for General Conference the next day, he kept his remarks brief, only hinting at what he had experienced. I have not lived alone these 5 months, he volunteered, in a voice that was more breath than words, and I have had my communications with the Spirit of the Lord continuously. Once conference was over, he dictated the vision to his son, Joseph Fielding Smith, also an apostle, who immediately recognized its significance. While the prophet was still bedridden, the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 unanimously endorsed the revelation as the word of the Lord and slated it for immediate release. Smith, however, did not live long enough to see it published. He joined the world of the spirits, the world he was so anxious to understand, less than 2 months before the vision was printed, merely a week after the armistice signed in Germany ended the World War. Due to the ongoing pandemic, the church somberly announced they were postponing any funeral service. Smith's death meant not only the passing of a generation, but the close of Mormonism's first century. Having been born amid the bloody expulsion from Missouri, he was the last prophet who had personally known Joseph Smith, the last who had walked Nauvoo's streets, the last who had remembered life before Utah, one of the few remaining bridges to the faith's pioneer origins. He viewed himself as guardian of heritage, protector of doctrine, a link between past and present. It was only fitting, then, that his final act was a vision that collapsed ancient and contemporary eras, biblical and modern prophets, current anxieties and future rewards, all wrapped up in a theology of eternity that merged the entire human family into one interconnected web that would have made his prophet uncle proud. His words, published posthumously as if uttered from the grave, urged believers to remember that the grave was not the end. All right.